Good day, friends. I am here to talk to you about the Committees of Correspondence. When you are sending or receiving an email or even navigating to a news website, how long does that take? Just seconds, right? In our time today, the 21st century, communication is very fast or even instant. We can hear about something that happened in another part of the world just minutes after it happens, or even seconds. In the 18th century, however, in the colonial era, communication was very slow. I like to even call it painfully slow. It took weeks or months for information to move from colony to colony. The colonists didn't have communication devices. They had to write letters or print newspapers, and then those informational pieces had to be mailed by someone riding horseback to another colony. It took a really long time for information to pass. And as the conflict between Great Britain and the colonies grew, it was really important that information moved quickly. If something happened in Boston, say the Stamp Act riots, how long would it take for colonists in North Carolina to find out? It took way too long. It would probably take months for colonists in the South to hear about something that happened in the North. So there needed to be some sort of ability to pass information quickly and in an organized way. When big events happened in one colony, like the Stamp Act riots or the Boston Massacre, people in other colonies needed to know, because the colonies are going to start joining together and forming relationships that will help them to fight the American Revolution. Remember, before the American Revolution, each colony operated independently. They each operated as their own little country. There was no pre-established way to pass communication from one colony to another. So here's where Mr. Samuel Adams comes into our story. He saw the need for a reliable, fast way to pass information about what was happening in Boston to the other colonies. Boston was seen as a rebellious city by Great Britain, so there were a lot of protests and boycotts going on in Boston, and Samuel Adams thought that the rest of the 13 colonies needed to know what was happening in Boston so they could resist the British in their colonies as well. Samuel Adams founded or established the first Committee of Correspondence in Boston in 1772, and the purpose was to share news, information, and support with the other colonies. If the colonies could coordinate, means work together and collaborate, talk to each other, form relationships that would help them to resist the unfair British policies, that would be ideal to getting people to join the revolution effort on the side of the Patriots. So committees of correspondence started to pop up all through the colonies. And finally, there was a way for news to be shared reliably and consistently. So Boston's Committee of Correspondence would write letters to the committees of correspondence in other colonies that they were connected to. And those committees of correspondence, they would write back to Boston and to the other colonies' committees of correspondence to share what was happening in their area. So thanks to this form of communication, the colonies were able to create bonds with each other. Now remember, like I said, the colonies before the Revolution were all independent. They all looked out for their own interests. Virginia was only concerned with what was happening in Virginia. Maryland, The colony of Maryland only cared what happened in Maryland. The colony of Massachusetts only cared about its own interests. But these committees really allowed the bonds between the colonies to form. They allowed relationships between colonies to be established, and that's what allowed the 13 colonies to join together and fight the British. So I like to think of the Committees of Correspondence with this saying: alone we are weak, but together we are strong. So I think that if it weren't for the Committees of Correspondence, the colonies may not have joined together like they did and formed those important relationships that were needed for them to come together and fight the British and to win the American Revolution.